Today is April 25th, 2013. And I have in front of me, as usual, the latest edition of the New York Times. And I'll talk a little bit about Guantanamo because that seems to be the story du jour in the New York Times. You have pictures of 6 inmates, for some reason in black and white, on the cover. And I'm assuming this article, I haven't had a chance to read it, but it is probably about their hunger strike because they're in such despair. And of course, the majority of inmates at Guantanamo have been deemed innocent, and no one seems to be able to get it together at the Justice Department to actually send them back to the countries. And some countries have been willing to accept these detainees, but they've been there for years and they are not charged with anything, and they never did anything. They were just taken to Guantanamo Bay and stored. Of course, the reason being that Guantanamo is a very important part of the agenda for the future. Because what it does is it makes it possible, it sets the agenda, it creates the legal precedent so that inmates can be charged and held as enemy combatants, or not charged or named as enemy combatants, but not charged and held indefinitely. Even when they've been shown to be innocent, we have to assume that the Obama administration, the U.S. government, is fearful that they may become terrorists once they return to their home countries. This is very unlikely to happen. I think these men probably just want to get on with their lives. Now, they have shown statistics in the past that some of the people who were released from Guantanamo did actually go and join radical forces. But the numbers were skewed. It was inaccurate. And it made it look way worse than it actually was. So, again, this is all for political reasons. These are pawns in an enormous global geopolitical game, and they're the victims. And it's very possible that the young man who was picked up out of the boat in the backyard in Boston may end up in Guantanamo himself, and he will be the first American sent, if this happens, to Guantanamo, and this can be the whole new prison system that blossoms out of Guantanamo, but this time it'll be Americans. It won't be guys from Yemen or Afghanistan or Pakistan or some other Middle Eastern country or Central Asian country. It will be Americans. So remember, Obama, when he campaigned for the presidency in 2008, said he would close Guantanamo. And he kept delaying and kept delaying and kept delaying. You might say, oh, this is an oversight, that these guys have been declared innocent but not released. Again, this also sets the precedent that you can keep people even when they have been declared innocent because of what they might possibly do in the future. This is their thinking. This is pre-crime. This is preemptive imprisonment, indefinite imprisonment. It's looking into the future, gauging that someone may become a danger to the U.S. national security, and then taking steps to prevent that from happening. And of course, it's all total, not a solution, and it's not even really meant even to be a solution. It's meant to bring about the next phase in the global construction of the giant world of the future that they have planned for the 21st century. And you notice it pretty much started with 9/11 and 2001. There was a reason for that. And they're trying to follow the playbook that they've set up. And we all, of course, know that the New World Order has been around for a very long time, and it was talked about and discussed and planned for during the 19th century, the 20th century. And H.G. Wells even wrote a book called The New World Order. Joseph Biden, our vice president, recently publicly mentioned bringing in the New World Order very soon. He named it as the New World Order. So don't let anyone ever tell you that the New World Order is not on the minds of the leaders of this planet, or our own elected leaders, our appointed leaders, as well as the captains of industry. Because this is a very good system for them. It's an efficient system for them. It's a top-down command and control system in which they can bring in a neo-feudalist society of very much like third world countries are set up, like Mexico and countries in Europe and in Southern Europe, and Africa, South America, where you have these fabulously wealthy families who own almost everything, and everyone else is landless peasant. And this is the way in the medieval times feudalism worked. You were basically property of the landlord, the owner of the land, the king, the local king. And you would be conscripted into his army to fight his neighbors or his wars of conquest. You would be subject to taxation. And my understanding it was that it was a minimum of 10% a tithing taxation, and now, of course, we actually pay more than that when you add up all the taxes. And it was a burden. It was a burden on the people. And this is where the idea that, what do we need a monarch for came from. It came from the frustration of the people who were bearing the burden of the increasingly decadent and self-serving lord of that city-state or that small country, and his dependents, his hangers-on, the court people, the people who curried his favor, and got the goodies, got the perks that went along with basically kowtowing to the local head of state, whether it would be a queen or duke or king, and it was just a cookie cutter situation all over the world. We saw this in Japan. Japan, until the early part of the 20th century, was very much a feudalistic society, and it was a caste system, a strict caste system, and it was dismantled. And the samurai caste were pretty much thrown out into the street and were wondering what to do, and they just had to do something else, most of them, because they were determined they were going to bring in a republic, a democratic system, and they busted it all apart. And of course, they were following in the footsteps of other countries around the world that had done the same thing. And this is for a reason. It's because the people had an understanding that they could have a society in which every man was a king, every man was a lord of his own manor, and all were equal, and liberty would triumph. The blessings of freedom and self-rule and sovereignty, personal sovereignty, the understanding. It was a a revelation that human beings were as good as, every human being was as good as the next human being. And those at the top have never been comfortable with this situation, and they've always tried to regain the power that they were forced to cede to the lower classes, the common herd. And by hook or by crook, they are now in the process of dragging that power that they lost back to them. And of course, this whole scenario has been repeated over and over and over throughout history, where the common people get power for themselves and personal freedom, and then it's by warfare, by conquest, or by persuasion or trickery, deceit, it is dragged away from them. And people have a tendency to, once they have their liberty, once they have their personal sovereignty, to take it for granted, and they get lazy as the generations move forward from generation to generation. You tend to assume that this is going to be the permanent state of things. It's normalcy bias. And you don't remember and you don't realize that there are powerful forces working behind the scenes. And these people are extremely smart, extremely well educated, and highly motivated. And it's like the mafia. Mafia, they think in terms of their family, their legacy, just like the aristocrats do. Not just working for them, but working for their son. And then their son works for his son. And to try to build something. This is the way immigrants often think, I've noticed in this country. They work very hard so that their children can do better than they did. And then once they have it, and once they have a level of comfort, and they've reached the comfort zone where they feel like everything's cool, Now I can just play. Now I can reap the benefits of all the hard work of my parents or my grandparents. And then they slack off. There's a reason why it's called, they call them slackers, and that's what they are. And a lot of younger people, a lot of people even my age, they feel like, hey, we've got it all. We've got this high standard of living. Let's just play. And that's what they do. And they're in for a rude awakening. And people like Alex Jones at Infowars.com they have analyzed the situation. They have the documentation. They have the expertise. Alex Jones himself is like an absolute, he's a cornucopia of information. And he's so obsessed, and he works so incredibly hard to keep abreast and do the deep research to get the whole picture, that you can very quickly, when you listen to Alex Jones at Infowars.com, you listen to his radio show, The Alex Jones Show, which is played in this area between noon and 3 p.m. Monday through Friday on WAIS, and that would be AM 770 if you're interested in just tuning in to his live radio show every day, 5 days a week. It's well worth it. You will get an in-depth analysis of today's news, and it will be linked, verbally linked, through his agile thinking processes to what has come before, it will be put in an historical perspective that is amazing sometimes. He's also entertaining and amusing sometimes, and sometimes a bit disturbing, and they call him the T-Rex of talk radio for a reason. So if you want to be challenged, if you want to learn, if you want some in-depth information, go and listen to the Alex Jones radio show between 12 and 3 on WAIS AM 770 here locally. And the reason I mention him is because you can study the New York Times every day, and I do. I make an effort to do that. But you will find that there are certain aspects of a story which you will not get. The New York Times has an obligation to try to be accurate because they know that their credibility will be destroyed if they are not accurate. But where they fail is the fact that you're not getting a complete picture of a story. Now, there are some places in the New York Times where it is outright bald-faced lies. Most of the New York Times lies in a typical day are lies of omission. They just don't tell you the whole story. Now, where the big lie that's happening right now is in the Boston bomb case with the two young men from Chechnya, who one of whom is dead, and they just arrested the other one, and he's in a hospital under heavy guard, apparently can't talk, and is writing notes, and now they finally read him his Miranda rights. But this whole story, the narrative is being developed about how they were radicalized by the internet. My sister just visited from the East Coast, and she admitted that she never reads, and she gets all her news from television, and she just believes the story as it is given to her on the evening news. And she doesn't, when they talk about these young kid, this young guy, he's 26, the older brother, being in this dramatic shootout with the cops. One thing that is amazing to think of is that a young guy with his background could be involved in something like this. I mean, it just doesn't seem likely. And when you link that to the reality that he actually he's being groomed. He has been groomed for the last 5 years by the CIA, by the FBI, mentored, the FBI, CIA machine communicates with his family, with him. He, I'm sure, thought that he had a career in the CIA or the FBI and that he was a shoo-in, and he was actually felt part of the team. And he probably got his brother to come along, and his brother thought he was going to be part of the team too. A lot of young guys think it would be very cool to be spies. Run around, dramatic life, you get paid well probably, go to different countries, be an undercover agent, a little James Bond running around. I've heard CIA agents myself say this. When I got started, I thought I was James Bond. So a lot of these guys, they get caught up in the drama, the adventure, the excitement of, and to boot, he's an immigrant, and he probably was very patriotic and thought he would do something for his country as well as, and so this is a win-win-win. You get paid, you have fun, you have adventure, you get to be cool, you get to travel, the whole 9 yards. But one thing he didn't count on, because he hadn't done his research, was that he would be on the receiving end of a false flag bombing attack and made into a patsy and then be dead. He wasn't expecting that. And his brother wasn't expecting that either. One of my housemates said, I haven't seen this interview, but the two brothers' mother said that he was set up. What, set up? How is that possible? Would the FBI actually set up someone or frame someone? Well, the reality is, of course, is that almost all of the so-called terrorist attacks that take place on American soil have been promulgated, invented, developed by the FBI. They're notorious for doing this. And what will typically happen is that a guy, and he's maybe some low-level criminal, not too smart, calls himself a Muslim, maybe black, maybe Middle Eastern, goes to the mosque in New York City or Washington, D.C., or some other town, city in the United States. He's approached by another Middle Eastern guy who says he's a Palestinian. In reality, he's not a Palestinian at all. He says he's a Palestinian patriot, and he needs someone to help him strike a blow for the Palestinians against the Israelis. And he has a plan, but he needs help to do it. And would he be willing to help? Well, no, not really. I don't know. Well, I have access to funds. Look, how about $50,000? And you bring in a couple of your friends and make a team of it. And all you have to do, I will provide you with the bomb. All you have to do is set the bomb on the steps of the synagogue, and then go to your car and press the button, press in a number on your cell phone, and that's it. You're done. And we'll pay you $50,000, and we'll pay each one of your friends $20,000 each. And so he hems and haws, and months go by, and the whole relationship is developed. And finally, he agrees to do it for the money. He needs the money. And the guy, he doesn't have a job, and of course we're in the middle of a recession. Let's say it's 2009 or 2010. He's hurting. And of course, this is the guy that was chosen for this very reason, because he's financially strapped, because he has a criminal record, because thinks it's cool to be a Muslim, or maybe is a Muslim. And he sympathizes with the suffering of oppressed people around the world. But he's just not too bright. And he's certainly never heard of a false flag. And he doesn't know that this so-called Palestinian is not really from Palestine at all, but he's from a different country, a Middle Eastern country. And he's been what he actually is a drug runner who's been arrested, a drug trafficker, by the FBI, and he's looking at 20 or 30 years in prison, and the FBI says, look, we can get you off of this drug charge if you help us out catch some terrorists. And he goes, yeah. Okay, you have to find them. You find guys who look like they might be interested in doing a terrorist act, and and you run them through the whole thing, and then we'll catch them and stop them at the last minute. And of course, in a way, he's being duped as well. But he's willing to go along with it. Maybe he catches on right away. He knows, okay, I understand. Maybe they don't tell him directly what you have to do. Okay, I understand, yeah. Here's what you do. I've got to find a guy who I think would be a good candidate to commit a terrorist act. And you have to introduce the idea to him. You have to pay him. You have to kind of push him along, as the months pass. And sometimes this goes on for a year or more before finally the guy's ready. And then he's reluctant. He's in the car. Well, I don't know. Are you sure that, let me see that. How much money were you going to give me again? God, I could really use that money. So, okay. So then he does it. And of course, the bomb doesn't go off. It's a dud. And he's immediately arrested. Then the next day, big headlines. FBI thwarts terrorist attack against local synagogue. Another win for the heroic FBI when they set up the guy in the beginning. And then inevitably, when you read about the trial, the lawyers for the guys who were arrested, they always say, but my clients were set up. This was not just an ordinary sting. This is entrapment. And inevitably, the juries, the judges, that ain't going to wash. No, you're going to jail. There's a lot of guys in jail for that very reason. That is what this so-called war on terror is all about. That's where it is. The whole thing has been a manufactured, it's an enormous project for the 21st century that was planned beforehand, way back when people began to realize that, hey, who's going to be our enemy after communism is no longer a threat? Remember, communism isn't gone, it still exists, but it's no longer a threat. So it wasn't the communists who were the threat. It was, even the communists was a manufactured threat. Sure, they're bad guys, but then if you look at a book like Rogue State by William Blum, which goes through the entire history from World War II up to 2000 or 2001 of the crimes committed by the United States, you see, some of them against its own people. You see that both sides, the so-called good guys and the so-called bad guys, are guilty of horrendous, heinous crimes against their own people and other people around the world. So it's not like it's an ideology. The ideology is just inherently evil. But it's the people who use that ideology and thwart and warp that ideology for their own purposes, because they are the criminal minds, the sociopaths, the psychopaths, who get control gradually because of their ruthless nature. They work very, very hard to drive a wedge up through the ranks in the pyramid, in the big pyramid. Because, you have the lower level people on the bottom, and then above that, the lower management, and the higher management, the middle management, and the higher management. And the sociopath has a drive to get to the top. And he's ruthless. He has no conscience. He has no feelings. He has no empathy. He doesn't understand the idea of empathy. He's self-serving, and he's also incompetent, pretty much more or less incompetent. And because the sociopath and the psychopath have a personality disorder, and they rise through the ranks by knocking the person above them out of power by nefarious means oftentimes. And they finagle. They're geniuses at doing this. And so gradually they work their way to the top. And so they've done studies that have shown that the higher you go in a company, the higher the percentage of sociopaths you find. And people who are working for companies in the corporate world have to understand this and be wary of this, because these people are sometimes the most charming people you will ever meet. And of course, that's how they manipulate you. They get you to believe that they're remarkable, wonderful, generous, spiritually evolved even. This type of thing. So you would, and people who are naive can very easily fall under the spell of this false kind of charisma that a sociopath projects. I've read that George W. Bush is a perfect example of a sociopath, that you will fall in love with the guy, that he can charm you like no one else. And of course, he has no empathy, he has no sympathy. When the young woman was executed, and when he was governor of Texas, he made fun of her. She was begging him. She said that she had a jailhouse conversion, which appeared to be genuine. He executed her anyway, and he laughed about it. He thought it was funny that she would be begging him, and he imitated her voice, her whining, begging voice. That's just one example of the kind of behavior that we saw from George W. Bush. Now, I don't know if Barack Obama is a sociopath, but I wouldn't be surprised. He's probably a sociopath in a different way. He has that cool detachment of the technocrat, of the educated, but very angry and bitter guy, inside. But he's a thorough professional, and so you don't see beyond the mask. You see the cool exterior, and everything is very carefully modulated. And he's very precise. This is the reading that I get of Barack Obama. And his thinking is, it's all like playing the game of basketball. You make the right moves and you hit the basket. You swish it right through if you can. And this is the way he's been. Now lately, he seems to be, this hard exterior seems to be cracking a little bit because of the pressure. It's very difficult. There's a lot of pressure on the man who's chosen to be the mouthpiece for the New World Order. And he gets the brunt. He's taking the hits so that the people behind him who are really calling the shots won't have to suffer. And he puts himself there. People fight for this position of President of the United States. And maybe they're naive, or maybe they're not. Maybe they understand fully. I don't know of what they're up against, who they really are, and who their masters really are. We have to understand that it is not about parties. It is not about Democrats, Republicans. But the unelected officials are running the show. They're the long-term people in power. And why do they have to live so long? Apparently, it just seems like these guys hang on and hang on and hang on and hang on. Henry Kissinger is turning 90, I guess. He's still in there. He's still being influential on some level. I was just reading somewhere that some information came out about him, and he was laughing. This is the kind of guy who laughs about the evil that he does, and he's done a lot of evil in his life. And I can imagine where he's going when the reality hits him after he shuts his eyes and stops breathing at the end of his life, what is going to happen to him, how he's, I don't think that it's just the end and there's just oblivion when you stop breathing and your brain shuts down and you leave the body. I don't think it's over. There is payback. There's hell to pay for the kind of behavior of someone who's clearly a sociopath, another one, like Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger is supposed to have said in some meeting that someone recorded, he says, illegal we can do immediately, unconstitutional takes a while. And then they laugh about it. And this is their attitude. The Constitution is a joke to them. The idea that ordinary people could be equal to them, to the superior beings that they consider themselves, this is against everything that they've been brought up to believe from childhood because of where they come from. You join that group, you get into that group, and suddenly the whole world, this whole new world opens up to you, where you suddenly realize, oh my God, I'm being told, I'm being given information that was withheld from me before because I wasn't in this inner circle, but now I'm in it. And everything turns toward you. You know, you see how the systems that are in place are geared to help you and rob and steal from those who are not in the inner circle. Even as a landowner, myself, as self-employed, I've seen this happen in my own life in a micro scale. As soon as you get away and you're no longer a wage slave, then suddenly you're in this other level. You're in this inner group, and a lot of times the landlords, they work together. It's almost like an unspoken group. And some landlords do have landlord groups, ownership. You suddenly become part, on a very low level, part of the owner class. And of course, this is echoed and repeated on higher and higher levels. I mean, I'm in the owner class, the landlord class, but on a very low level. And there are people above me, and then people above them, and people above them, and people above them, until you get to the people at the very top, the owner class, who are the true owners, like the Rothschilds, who have taken their names off of their banks, off of all their holdings. You almost never see the actual Rothschild name anymore. That's because they don't need it to be on their holdings. They're way beyond that. And they found it expedient to keep in behind everything. I had an economist tell me, I mentioned the Rothschild family, and this is a lifelong economist, a professor of economics. I mentioned the Rothschild family. He said, wow, I haven't heard that name in a very, very long time. So, in other words, he's teaching economics on the university level and never mentioning the name of Rothschild. So how many students have never even heard of the richest family in the world? The people who virtually invented modern banking hundreds of years ago. The people who, at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, used their expertise and the network of spies to actually rig the stock market and cause most of Europe and Great Britain to fall into the hands of one family. And this is incredibly important for history. That's when the Rothschilds came into their own. And now, of course, at that time they were worth billions. This is in the early 19th century, more than anyone in the world. And now they're untold trillions beyond that. And I've been told that, I read somewhere that Arnold Schwarzenegger was invited to one of these parties at the mansion of Baron de Rothschild in Britain. And if you get invited to that, you are in. And so this is before he became governor, and then he became governor. So he's in with those people. And he may have been like the trained monkey or something at the party. But he was nevertheless at the party. And when you factor in that, and the Rockefellers with their Bilderberg group, and bringing certain American politicians to the meetings secretly of the Bilderberg group, when they're not really even supposed to be meeting secretly. This is bald-faced illegality happening here. But it's got to the point where elected and appointed officials of the United States government, they consider themselves to be above the law. and it's becoming like Central Asian countries or Middle Eastern countries where the watchword is laws are for poor people. And of course, again, nothing has changed. And people will poo-poo me and say, well, it's always been that way. Yes, it's always been that way. And that just strengthens what I'm saying, that it's always been that way. It doesn't mean that, well, that's normal, that's the way it should be, or that there's nothing we could do about it, or that we shouldn't do anything about it. No, that even strengthens the necessity to be aware, to be educated, to move in as a grown-up, as an adult, to become an adult, to take responsibility for your own personal sovereignty and the sovereignty of your community, the sovereignty of your county, your state, and even the sovereignty of your country. And the way things are going right now in Europe, you can look at Europe and you can say, wow, apparently things aren't working out. The euro seems to be in trouble. A lot of these nations in the European Union are suffering. The people of Greece are suffering. The people of Spain, incredibly high unemployment. They're saying, 22% unemployment in Spain? And it's difficult to gauge how much worse that is than unemployment in the United States, because we're not sure whether the way that these numbers are added up is the same. Because in the United States, of course, our unemployment, which is less than 8%, 7.5% or something, 7.7% unemployment, that's a false number. That's a number that only reflects the people in the system who are actively looking for work. They're going to the unemployment office, they're signing up, they're going through the whole rigmarole to try to use that system to get a job. And then once they give up, then they're out of the system, and they're not reflected in the numbers that create that percentage, which is published and talked about ad nauseum in the media. Now, in Europe, maybe they do the same. I don't know if they add up the numbers to come up with 22%. My understanding is that the real numbers of unemployment in the United States are right around there, which makes sense that they would be in a way, because the way things are interconnected because of globalism, more and more things are happening simultaneously around the world. Events in Bangladesh, for instance. I mean, Bangladesh, we had a building collapse because of the corruption in the building. You know, the building inspectors are probably bribed. It's a corrupt government, like so many governments are. And so they're not putting in the strong concrete that's needed to keep a building, maybe even a new building. Sometimes even these new buildings collapse. And so they're raking money off the top. They're getting money for the contract to build the building, but they're not spending the money. In order to increase their profits, they're not putting in those safety features that enable this building to withstand, the test of time, or even to withstand, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. A building should last 100 years. I mean, no concrete building should collapse. No building should collapse. There's absolutely no reason why that should happen in a building that's made properly. Very unlikely. It's amazing. You had all these deaths, but what you're looking at is a garment factory in Bangladesh, and the safety precautions that are probably in the laws were not followed, and so you had massive death. We saw the same thing happen 100 years ago or more at a garment factory in New York City, the same thing happened. A major fire, a lot of deaths, and this happens over and over and over. So the same thing is happening, and you have a lag of maybe 50 to 100 years or something like that in these other countries where these are developing countries, right? That's what they're calling them, developing countries. So yeah, so they're following some of the same path that happened in the West, happened in America, happened in Europe, happened in Great Britain, and the so-called developed countries who have the infrastructure in place. And a lot of suffering results from the greed, the corruption that goes on, the crime that goes on. We have to think in terms of crime being something that, you know, certain people engage in. They're going to engage in it no matter what, because why? Why would they engage in crime? Because that is how you get wealthy. And people who really want to be wealthy in their lifetime know that that's how you do it. It's very, very difficult to get wealthy legally in your own lifetime. It just takes a long time to build it up. Now, you may get, you know, the job of a CEO. Maybe a CEO operates legally. I wonder. I'm not even sure if a CEO does, but the kind of wealth the CEO gets, that makes you wealthy really fast. When you're getting, you know, $1 billion a year, you're going to get wealthy. Bingo, you're there. Most people, if they're going to, they have to cut corners, and crime is the way to cut corners. And so these are ambitious people, and oftentimes they're intelligent people, but they're also ruthless. They don't care about other people. They don't care what happens to people. They don't mind or care about exploiting people. Maybe they think there are too many people in the world anyway, and we need to reduce the population, and they're just helping. I doubt if they think that, you know, that way really. They just simply don't care. They have a Darwinistic view of the world. Dog eat dog, survival of the fittest. You're going to, you know, make it by hook or by crook, one way or the other, and you have a lust for the goodies and the luxury that come as a result of wealth. So there are certain people who are going to take advantage if you have a system that they see other people, maybe their boss is corrupt. They say, wow, he's getting away with it. Why can't I get away with it? And then it percolates down through the whole system. If you have the people at the top of the pyramid who are corrupt, who consider themselves to be above the law, they are going to inspire their underlings to emulate them. That's what they do. That's what underlings do. They emulate, they imitate. So they feel like, hey, I can get away with it too. And they can. Very often they can. That is the way that the stock market, for instance, is right now. It is horrendously corrupt. I was just reading about the electronic trades that go on, and it's apparently legal. What they do is they just say it's legal. They just make it legal, even though it's completely unfair. The computers are so fast now that nanoseconds, bing, 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 and they're making trades so fast, and maybe because minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, second by second, the prices of all these commodities are going like this, up and down, up, down, up, down, maybe just a little. But if the computer can track that and just make that trade, bing, 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 up, down, it goes down, make it, automatically. Buy, sell, buy, sell, buy, sell, buy, sell, buy, sell, buy, sell. And then maybe you're only making pennies in profit, but it adds up. It's all so fast. And then you have the other part of the stock market in which you have bald-faced insider trading from the privileged group, who they get the information beforehand, and they basically made it legal for them to do this because they also have control through the revolving door policy of politics, business, business, politics, and they zip around and help each other out. And that's how you make it in the world. And that leads more and more and more to creating the neo-feudalist state, which is what they want, where they will have the luxury, they will have the guns, they will have the armed, the sentries basically surrounding the perimeter of their palace with their guard around it. We're already seeing this. Lots of people have these. Celebrities have these. In California, you can see them. You can drive past it, and they have the armed guards. They know what's coming. I know personally people who have huge, these are celebrities. I know one particular. He has a whole room full of arms, big ass guns, all ready to go, and lots of ammo all stockpiled. He's expecting some kind of breakdown in society in which he will have to defend what he has. And yet, at the same time, they feel that it behooves them to take the weapons and take the ammo and the ability to make ammo using, the gunpowder, to try to get rid of the gunpowder. They're thinking of every possible way that they can get the ability of the ordinary people to use weapons, firearms, out of their hands. They're desperately searching for ways. I was just hearing on NPR today that General Electric has now somehow finagled a way to jerk the credit from gun manufacturers. They're not giving them credit. And this impedes the ability to do business of these particular gun manufacturers. And who, of course, is behind General Electric? It would be the Obama administration, the U.S. government. They have anointed General Electric. They are one of their favored companies. They get the breaks. They're the ones that are going to get bigger, and they are getting bigger, more and more powerful. The others, forget them. We need to get rid of them, put them out of business, the competitors. These are the guys we're going to go with. It's like Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs was just another brokerage firm and speculating, Wall Street, the whole 9 yards. And then they were given the magic pixie dust to make them be able to fly by the Peter Pan president and those unelected officials above him who call the shots and make the decisions at the very highest levels. In the think tanks, in the smoke-filled rooms, in the fancy high-end restaurants, in the meeting rooms in places like Davos, Bilderberg, and the mansions of the world's wealthiest people, sitting around casually talking. But of course they know that everything that's said here, this will be implemented. This will be translated into wars. This will be translated into opening up new territories, let's say, for oil exploration. They talk about it casually. These are human beings. And they say, well, we ought to do this, We need to really open up that land on the north slope of Alaska. I mean, come on. I mean, this is the time. We cannot we cannot pretend that we're trying to save those areas from exploration. We need that oil. It's the time to get it. And so Obama, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. We need that XL pipeline. We need that pipeline through your country. How are we going to make this happen? Then you have people like James Hansen, who's the high priest of the climate change movement. He's the guy that really drew attention to what he considered to be a danger to life on Earth. And then he was picked up by the politicians and, hey, we could make money on this. This is a good way to go. This is an incredible way to control people with this climate change fear. We can ramp the fear up. We can use this for decades. I think the whole thing is beginning to unravel over time because people are seeing it's not happening. It's not happening. People tell me in a kind of half-hearted way, well, but the world is getting warmer. But hey, they're not seeing any effects. I mean, it was a cold spring this year. Okay, so that's it for today. I'm out of time, and sleep well, friends.